What are the biggest problems with owning an electric vehicle that you need to be aware of? That's what we're going to find out. Welcome to Car Corner, where we help you, the consumer, master the process of car buying and car ownership. Although more and more consumers are becoming interested in electric vehicles, there are many serious concerns with EV ownership that you really need to be aware of before you make a decision. So for this video, I'm going to share the 10 biggest issues and headaches of electric vehicle ownership that you really need to know about. But before we get into it, remember, if you enjoy and get value out of this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. So let's start off with the first issue with EV ownership, which is public chargers. Although the concept of using a public charger sounds very straightforward, your car has a low charge, you pull up to the charger, plug it in, wait maybe 30 to 60 minutes, and then off you go. Unfortunately, it's nowhere near that simple. The first issue with public chargers is that they can be extremely unreliable. It is very common to come up to one and have it not working at all. And not only can they be extremely unreliable, but it's not as simple as just tapping your credit card and charging your car. All of them have their own proprietary app that you need to download, and some of them can be really frustrating to use, or they might not work at all. And even if the chargers are working, you might be faced with a lineup of cars ahead of you, all waiting to charge just like you are. And it's not so easy that you can just go to another charger down the road, because they're often nowhere near as common as comparable gas stations. Now, some are certainly better than others. Tesla is a very notable example that has a very reliable charging network and a better network than most other brands. But unfortunately, when it comes to every single other charger out there, you really can't rely on them on a regular basis. They are just way too problematic and unreliable. And having issues with charging is a problem that's also linked to the next major issue with electric vehicle ownership, which is unpredictable driving range. Even though an electric vehicle might advertise a certain driving range, say for example a range of 300 miles or around 500 kilometers on one charge, the real-world range can be completely different. For example, it's well known that extreme climate conditions, such as very cold or very hot weather, can have a very severe impact on the driving range. And even though most EVs have very sophisticated thermal management systems and even heat pumps that are supposed to help you in really cold weather, if you live somewhere that has, say for example, extremely cold winters, you might still suffer from a range loss anywhere from around 20 to 30%, and that's a major problem. And this is also true if you do a lot of long distance highway driving or if you do any kind of towing, both of which can also impact the range of an EV. And just like most other electronics that have batteries, the manufacturers typically recommend that you keep the battery anywhere from 20 to 80% charge. So even though it might theoretically have a range of say 300 miles, the actual usable range, if you care about the life of the battery, is actually much less than that. But there are other issues with the batteries that you need to be aware of, which brings us to the next major issue and headache of EV ownership, and that is battery degradation. Unfortunately, just as they do with electrical devices, the batteries in electric vehicles do degrade over time, and they will slowly lose their capacity. It's generally accepted that most electric vehicles will lose approximately 5 to 10% of their capacity over the first 100,000 miles or 160,000 kilometers, which means if you buy an EV that has a range of say 300 miles when it's brand new, after several years, it might only be able to travel say around 270 to 280 miles. And this degradation will only increase as the vehicle ages and as the mileage increases over time. Which is why I always recommend that anybody that wants to buy an EV, buy the one that has the most amount of range. And if the car has a choice between two different batteries, a standard range and a long range, it's always best to go with the longer range battery, just to give yourself more of a buffer and protection against battery degradation. But unfortunately, battery degradation is not the only issue that you need to be concerned with, which brings us to the next major problem with EV ownership, and that is the tires. Now, if you're buying an EV, you might be thinking that you're going to save yourself a ton of money on maintenance, especially when it comes to things like oil changes, which are not necessary on an EV. The brakes on an EV are also known to last an extremely long time as well, but one maintenance item that's known to not last very long are the tires, and this is a major problem. Because electric vehicles typically have a lot of power going to the wheels, and they're also much heavier than normal vehicles, this puts a lot more wear on the tires. So depending on the vehicle that you're looking at, you could be replacing your tires 2 to 3 times more often than a comparable conventional vehicle. So all the money that you're going to save on brakes and oil changes is just going to be spent on tires. And if you were thinking that an electric vehicle was going to keep you outside the dealership or garage, think again, because that brings us to the next major issue with EVs, and that is the cost of repairs, servicing, and dealerships. Even though theoretically EVs are relatively simple when compared to a conventional vehicle, you basically have a large battery pack and electric motor, unfortunately it's just not as simple as that. EVs can still have very complicated cooling systems, a lot of complicated electronics, computer modules, and not to mention all the same features as a conventional car, with all the sensors, cameras, and screens that go along with them. So these vehicles can be extremely complicated to repair, and when something does go wrong with them, they typically do cost more than a conventional vehicle. And not only that, but because EVs have not been on the market for a terribly long time, the repair knowledge is just not there yet, especially when compared to conventional vehicles or even hybrids. And for certain brands, like say for example Tesla, that can be a major headache because they typically have a very limited network when it comes to service centers, and servicing them can be a major pain. And that brings us to the number 5 issue or headache with owning an electric vehicle, and that is unknown long-term reliability. Because most of the popular electric vehicles that are on the market right now have not been around for a long time, we really don't know what the long-term reliability is really going to be like. They just don't have the proven track record that you have with a lot of conventional vehicles, or even a lot of hybrids. These vehicles have been on the market for a very long time, and we generally know what to expect. But that's not really the case when it comes to EVs. No one really knows for sure what they're going to be like when they're around 12 to 15 years old, or even beyond that. It's still a bit of a mystery. And this is an especially big problem because of the next major issue or headache with owning an EV, and that is the cost or potential failure of the EV battery. Now, so far at least, there's no real data that shows that electric vehicles are having their batteries fail. And on the bright side, electric vehicles do come with a very long battery warranty, typically 8 years long, but some of them are even 10 years long. But even though so far there's no real data to show that electric vehicle batteries are failing, the potential fear of battery failure is still going to be there, especially for owners that hold on to their vehicle past the warranty period. And this is a legitimate fear, especially when it comes to how much it costs to replace the battery packs. It can typically cost over 5 figures, at least 10 grand, sometimes even over 20 grand. So even if the risk of battery failure is extremely low, the idea that having a battery fail outside the warranty period basically makes your vehicle worthless and basically junk, it's not exactly an idea that a lot of owners can really get on board with. And this ties very closely to the next issue of electric vehicle ownership, and that is resale value. Even though a lot of EVs do hold their value fairly well for the first 3 to 5 years, beyond the warranty period when the cars are more than 8 years old, that's when the value is going to drop tremendously quick. And that's because a lot of consumers don't want to be stuck with an older electric vehicle that has a ticking time bomb of a battery that could potentially fail at any point, and basically making the vehicle worthless. The value of an electric vehicle is really closely tied to the age and condition of its battery. And if you have one that has an older battery that might have a questionable lifespan left, well, that vehicle is really not going to have much value in it. And then we have the number 2 issue with electric vehicle ownership, and that is the cost of insurance. Because electric vehicles are extremely expensive to repair, this also applies to collision repairs. They can be surprisingly expensive to insure as well. So even though electric vehicles are actually quite safe, and most of them have top-notch safety ratings, the cost of repair is still extremely high, and that pushes up the insurance premiums, something that a lot of buyers might not be prepared for. But what they might be prepared for is the number 1 issue with EVs, and that is how expensive they are to buy. This one is really no secret. It is well known that most electric vehicles are extremely expensive, and definitely well above the price range of the average consumer. We have just not reached the point yet where most electric vehicles are within the price range of the lower to middle class consumer, and that is a major barrier to ownership. With how expensive new vehicles are becoming every single year, who knows exactly when electric vehicles will be attainable for consumers. But one thing's for sure, the technology is going to dramatically improve over time, and there is a very strong chance that within the next decade, or maybe even within the next 5 years, a lot of the issues in this video will eventually be addressed. I've said it before, electric vehicles are a little bit like PCs were back in the 1990s. Every year there's a brand new model that's so dramatically better than the one that came before it that you can only benefit by waiting. Now, I am by no means an electric vehicle hater. In fact, I actually really like some of the electric cars that are on the market right now. But if you really want to have an electrified vehicle that doesn't have any of the compromises that I discussed in this video, I still think for a lot of consumers, it makes a lot more sense to consider something like a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid instead. I'll have another video debunking electric vehicle myths coming very soon to the channel. But in the meantime, let me know what you think of EVs. Are you ready to consider purchasing one, or would you wait and buy something else instead in the meantime? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also check out my other videos by clicking these links over here. Make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram. And if you need additional car buying advice, recommendations, or help with getting a great deal on your next new car purchase, make sure to visit carhelpcan.com. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.